Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jessie Haas. I am the Senior National Director of the Therapy Animal Program at Pet Partners. And I want to thank you for joining me here on Facebook for our Volunteering with Your Pet session. This is specifically designed for folks who are interested in joining Pet Partners with their animal as a therapy animal team. So, generally speaking, good for folks looking to find out more information or folks who are in the process of becoming a volunteer. But if you are here and you are already a volunteer yourself, please stay and hang out. We always love hearing your perspectives and your experiences about some of the things I'm going to discuss. So before I go any further, always helpful for me to know who is listening, where you're from, what kind of pet you have. So I encourage you to drop that in the comments on this live so I can see it. Again, really nice to know what kind of pet you have because Pet Partners registers 9 different species. And if we've got lots of diverse species, we can talk about all of those. But in general, throughout this entire presentation, you are more than welcome to make comments on the live. I will check them every once in a while and answer things as I go along. Anything that I don't get to during the presentation, I will loop back at the end and try to get questions answered. I want this to be a conversation as much as possible, but also just get a lot of information to you about volunteering with your pet. So I see Bree is here, Paige with Dog Charlie from Oakland. Thanks for joining us, Paige. Anybody else, please feel free to continue to let me know who you are as I get started here. So let's go to the first slide. My goal with any of these volunteering with your pet sessions is to start by giving you a sense of what therapy animal volunteerism looks and feels like. Where does it take place? What is the time commitment? All of that. And then I pivot and I talk more about the requirements to join. But I always feel like the requirements to join, the training, all of that information is better understood if you understand what volunteerism looks like first. So that's how I'm going to flow through this. Up on your screen, you can see places where therapy animals visit. So where you, sorry, I just had a little audio problem. I'm hoping people can still hear me. Anyway, up on your screen are places where folks visit with their pet. And this list is not exhaustive. Of our 8,000 volunteers, we visit at thousands of facilities. So I just wanted to give folks a sense of the types of places where therapy animal teams are invited in order to spread the healing power of the human-animal bond. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, great. I just heard that folks can hear me. I got a little notification on my headset, but it sounds like we're all good. So when you are out in the community visiting at some of those facilities that were just on your last screen, there are different types of visits that can take place at these locations. So the most common type of visit is what we call a social visit. That sounds casual, but it can have a great deal of impact for the people you are visiting because they are an opportunity to reduce somebody's isolation. For example, people who go into nursing care facilities with their pet, that might be the only visit some of the residents there would receive that week. So reducing isolation, reducing loneliness, giving people an opportunity to talk and engage with you as a handler, and of course, engage with your pet as well. On sort of the other side of the spectrum, a little bit more formal, are visits that might take place in a physical therapy or an occupational therapy setting. So in these situations, our volunteers with their pets will often pair up with a professional. So the professional, let's say a physical therapist is working with somebody on their fine motor skills, the use of their hands, perhaps after a surgery in a rehab center, something of that nature. They would invite you as your pet and your pet to work alongside them, and maybe they have their patient use a brush to brush your animal. That provides motivation for their patient or client to work on those fine motor skills and can lead to better outcomes as a result. Pet Partners also has a Read With Me program. This is a literacy-based program. It is most often in libraries, elementary schools, but also other locations as well. This is an opportunity for people learning to read to your pet. There have been a lot of studies about this specific type of therapy animal volunteerism. Again, there's a motivation factor here. A lot of young readers particularly get very excited to practice their reading if they get to do it with an animal. Also, an animal can provide a very non-judgmental space for those who might be struggling to learn to read. And we do see, again, better outcomes with early readers when they have the opportunity to read to an animal. Last but not least, one other type of visit, again, this list isn't exhaustive, just kind of going over some common types of visits, is stress breaks. So we see therapy animals visit in situations that can have high stress, perhaps at airports, at colleges and universities during finals week, at colleges and universities when freshmen or first-year students are moving in and leaving their family for the first time. We also see stress breaks happen in workplaces to provide an opportunity to escape some of the stress a little bit for the employees at that workplace. So we have a lot of therapy animal teams that are invited into these situations where there is high stress, and again, the opportunity to engage with an animal and bring that stress down just a little bit. So those are the types of visits we have, among others. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to check the comments here. A couple other people introduce themselves. Thank you, Karinka. I hope I'm saying your name appropriately, or you go by KP. You've got a Pomeranian. Wonderful. Hello, Stacy, also with a dog from Arizona. So lots of canine handlers here. Rosie the lab from Seattle as well. Thanks for attending, Colleen. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this live, we do register 9 different species. Today we've got all canines, as far as I know, listening to the live. Canines are our most common species. They represent about 94% of the animals that volunteer alongside their handlers with pet partners. But we are really, really proud to both recognize and promote the benefit of all of these other species as well. Oh, great. Right on time, Lisa. Lisa has cats and bunnies. So some of our less common species represented there with Lisa. And they all just have a really unique way of interacting with people. Oftentimes, our less common species can be a great fit, especially for people who might be fearful of canines, or in situations where smaller pets might be easier to navigate through the environment. Lots of different reasons that we welcome all of these species. So let's go to the next slide. So we've talked about the places where our volunteers visit. We've talked about what those visits often look like. Now I want to talk about what you as a volunteer are signing up for. What is the commitment you must make to pet partners? Well, the beautiful thing is we allow you to determine how often you want to volunteer. For some people, they like to volunteer weekly, sometimes even twice weekly. Other handlers only do it monthly or even seasonally, depending on what their schedule is like. It is really up to the handler and the facility where they volunteer to determine what is the schedule. So this is a volunteer opportunity because of that is so accessible to so many. It's also really important to think about what your pet enjoys. Obviously, all of our therapy animals enjoy going out and visiting, or they wouldn't be volunteering in this way with their handler. But some have lots and lots of energy to do it multiple times a week. Others, you might find for your pet, it's better to just go once a week or once a month. One thing to consider in terms of your time commitment is that it isn't just the visit itself, which is no more than 2 hours a day. That is one of our policies here at Pet Partners. You cannot visit with your pet more than 2 hours a day. That is because these are not working animals, right? They are volunteers. And as much as they love visiting, it is also very fatiguing. Even those who might just be laying and hanging around during a visit, it can be very tiring to interact with so many people. So we want to make sure we're not overexhausting the animals involved in our program. But beyond that, potentially up to 2-hour visits, you are going to want to consider the time it requires of you and your pet to prepare for the visit. We do want our pets to be obviously clean and fresh smelling before they go to a visit. So grooming is something to factor into your time commitment. And then after a visit, as I mentioned, you and your pet might be a little bit tired, so you need to factor in time to unwind. What else are you doing the rest of your day? So overall, that is what the commitment is. It's up to you. You get to determine your journey with us in terms of where you visit and how often you visit and how long you visit. We can go to the next slide. Welcome, Sherry and Leslie as well. more dogs joining us. So at this point, I'm going to move on to eligibility and also kind of preparation for becoming a therapy animal team if you so choose. So up on your screen, you'll see a list of questions to ask yourself in order to answer whether or not you're eligible, and I'll go through the answers to some of these as well. So pocket pets, that includes our rabbits and guinea pigs, so our very small pets. They need to be at least 6 months old to join the program. All other animals need to be at least 1 year old. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have a very young dog, let's say, and you're ready to get going, there are some elements of our process and our registration that you can begin before your animal turns 1 year old. It's simply that you cannot complete the evaluation or assessment step until your animal is 1 year old, and you can't become registered until after that date. Birds must live in the home with their owner for at least a year. For all other pets, it's at least 6 months. So what that means is if you adopted an animal, perhaps a cat, and that cat is 3 years old, it meets the age requirements, but it also needs to live with you for 6 months before you have you and your pet evaluated via our evaluation process or before you visit. This is just to ensure that you can strengthen your relationship and your bond, that you truly get to know that animal as you determine if it is an appropriate fit for a therapy animal volunteer opportunity. All animals must be reliably house trained. Waste or collection devices are not allowed. There is an exception for birds with flight suits, but for all other animals, regardless of species, they need to be house trained and no collection devices. Animals cannot be fed a raw protein diet and participate in the therapy animal program. Animals cannot have a history of aggression towards people or other animals. That wouldn't be allowed in the program. That would be disqualifying. Also, you need to consider your animal's health. So animals must be free of parasites, internal and external, understandably. They cannot be on antibiotics, antifungals, or immunosuppressive medications. They can, once the course of treatment is done, if this is for a short-term illness or medical need, they can return to visiting, but they cannot be on that medication while actively visiting. I do want to say that we have a lot of animals involved in the program who do have some chronic health issues. We also have animals who have disabilities. That doesn't automatically disqualify animals from the program. However, we want to make sure that whatever their disability might be or whatever their health condition might be, that it doesn't make them uncomfortable, because we don't want to have animals out in communities who are uncomfortable or where visiting might increase their discomfort. So if you have a pet that has an ongoing health issue or a disability, anything in those areas, we do encourage that you reach out to us. You can find the contact information for our staff online on our website. Reach out to us, let us know what's going on with your pet. That's always helpful to do earlier in the process, just so if we do identify anything or we need more information from your vet, we can gather that at that time before you've gone too far in the process. So that's something to keep in mind. I think we can move to the next slide. And again, everybody who kind of joined a little bit later, please feel free to type in comments, questions, concerns as I'm going through these slides. I'm happy to stop and answer any question that's on the topic of what's on your screen, or I can loop back at the end and take questions then as well. So I want this to be a conversation if you've got anything that's on your mind, concerns or questions. So we just talked about what makes your animal eligible. But just because your animal is eligible, of course, doesn't mean that they are necessarily the right fit or that they could be a successful therapy animal. So I want to talk about those types of qualities. So successful therapy animals are people-oriented, they're sociable, and they're friendly. Most of you probably wouldn't be listening to this if that wasn't true of your pet, but one really important caveat here is that they need to be people oriented with strangers as well. And they need to be people oriented even when there's distractions present. So we want to ensure that if an animal encounters an environment they're not used to or a person they're not used to, that doesn't change their temperament or change their personality. We really want the therapy animals in our program to very much enjoy interacting with all sorts of people and all sorts of environments. Now, that's not to say even our most experienced therapy animals don't sometimes walk into a situation and feel uncomfortable with it, or encounter an individual that they surprisingly don't really want to interact with. That's okay. That happens. They have their own distinct personalities, but we are looking for animals who are people-oriented, sociable, and friendly at almost all times in all situations. Of course, animals need to have good basic obedience skills. This is going to differ by species. For those of you who are on the call and don't have a dog, it can be sometimes a little bit harder to understand what kind of obedience skills we may be looking for. We have lists of all of these behaviors and the evaluation for those species in our volunteer center. So if you don't have a volunteer center account, you can create one from our website. Once you have those credentials set up, we have all sorts of information for you. One thing to pay attention to is the resources area of the volunteer center homepage. If you click on that and type in rabbit, or type in cat, or type in pig, you will get information very specific to that species. We understand for people who don't have dogs that sometimes this isn't as clear, or you may not know very many people who have done this with their cat or their rabbit or their pig before. So we do ensure to give you lots and lots of detail and information about your species. In terms of basic obedience skills for canines, as you can imagine, that is things like come, sit, stay, things of that nature. A little bit later in this presentation, I'll talk about what we actually evaluate for. But for sure, all successful therapy animals have good basic obedience skills. Of course, they need to remain calm and be comfortable being touched by others. Sometimes people are going to pet your animal in a way that your animal may not prefer. Now, one thing we do teach you at Pet Partners via our coursework is how to educate people on how your pet likes to be pet. We certainly ask you that you advocate for them. If somebody is petting your pet in a way that they don't prefer, you certainly can say, could you do it differently? Or maybe I'll come back another day. But still, as a general rule, your pet should expect that at certain times, there are going to be interactions where they have to remain calm and comfortable, even if it's something they're not used to. Let's go to the next slide here. See, we've got a few more joiners. Again, welcome to everybody. So I just talked about successful animals in the therapy animal program, but handlers are just as important. And that is something you will hear us talk about at Pet Partners all the time. The human end of the leash. You are the person who gets to decide where you go and visit and volunteer. You are the one who gets to decide how often. You are the one who gets to guide interactions between the public and your pet. So you have a lot of power in this relationship, and it's really important that we have successful handlers as well. You also, like your pet, need to be friendly, professional, and polite, even when interacting with strangers. We are looking for handlers who are able to predict and redirect their animal's behavior. So if you know you have a very, very food-motivated Labrador, I know we've got some Labradors and Retrievers and Retriever mixes represented here. You know how food-motivated they can be. Of course, you can train them to be polite around food, but also an example of predicting and redirecting behavior is to see, okay, this environment that I'm in, this room that I'm in has lots and lots of food. I'm going to turn around and go the other direction. I am going to ask that clients, patients, or students maybe meet with my pet over here so that they're not so close to the food. It's thinking ahead a few steps to set your animal up for success and also set the client, patient, or student up for success as well when they're interacting with your pet. Your number one priority as a handler is to ensure your animal's well-being at all times. Your priority is your pet. It actually isn't the client, patient, or student. So if you are interacting with somebody who isn't petting your pet in an appropriate way, and you try to redirect the client, patient, or student, they continue to do something that doesn't feel good to your pet, you need to ensure your pet's well-being by saying, you know, I'm going to have to excuse myself. We'll come back another day. I'm going to have to excuse myself. Maybe we can try again later. As disappointing as that might be for the person you were interacting with, again, that's just an example of the fact that your animal's well-being is your number one priority. And of course, successful handlers follow all Pet Partners policies and procedures, which are given to you via our handbook as you're going through the process of becoming a volunteer. We can go to the next slide. So up on your screen are actual steps to becoming a Pet Partners Therapy Animal Team. There are a few more steps beyond what is listed here, but these are sort of the main touch points throughout the process. The two that I'm going to speak the most about as we wrap up this presentation is step 2 and 4, the required handlers course, as well as the team evaluation or assessment that you and your pet need to go through. So let's take a deeper look first on the next slide at the handlers course. So as I already mentioned, the human under the leash is something Pet Partners emphasizes a great deal because of how much you get to determine in your volunteerism and in your pet's volunteerism. To that end, we require a handler's course for all prospective volunteers, people who want to join us as a new handler with their pet. This can be taken online or it can be taken in person. In-person opportunities are not available in all communities. So for some people, you only have the online choice. For other people, you certainly can determine which type of training works better for you. Obviously, the advantage of being in person is you get to kind of learn alongside other people who are interested in volunteering in the same way you are. You get the opportunity to ask, individual questions of an instructor. But the pro on the online side is that you are able to do it at your own pace. You can visit and revisit different modules. You can take several weeks to complete it if you're somebody who's really busy and can't set aside a whole day for an in-person course. So it's totally up to you. And this is where you learn about policies and procedures. This is where you learn about reading your animal's stress signals, reading your animal's fatigue signals, how to manage interactions between your animal and somebody who's receiving a visit, how to deal with difficult situations like some that I've already mentioned in this presentation where you need to end a visit early. So it's a really comprehensive course no matter which option you choose to take. Before I move on, really important to point out, we don't require any training for the animal. People are often surprised to hear that, but there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, if you don't have a dog, it's very hard to find structured training programs for other species. So we want to make sure that we are inclusive of all of our animal friends. Additionally, even among canines, we have pets coming to us with their handlers at different points in their life or their training. So we have some people who might have a 6 or 7-year-old animal or dog joining us, and they have completed obedience courses and they have done all of that. Maybe they're even doing agility, and that has already happened. We certainly don't want to require those people to go through any additional training for their animal at that time. Other people are coming to us earlier in their pet's life or before they've really experienced any training, and we believe they know their pet best, they know their dog best. They can enroll in the type of courses, if they so choose, for their pets training in their community that fits their budget, their schedule, all of that. Ultimately, our evaluation, which we're just about to get to, will actually assess if your pet has the right behaviors. So for us, that's what's more important. How you get your pet to that point to be able to pass the evaluation is up to you. So we require handler training, but we don't require animal training. It's up to you how that's done. So let's move to the next slide. All right, so the Pet Partners evaluation. This is where you and your pet go and get in front of a licensed Pet Partners team evaluator to move through a series of exercises. It's about 20, give or take a few. Some species have slightly different exercises, or if you have a really small dog who's going to be carried, exercises might look a little bit different than larger dogs, but about 20 different exercises. And it's split into kind of 2 halves. And it starts with more of the obedience type exercises. So you'll be asked, if you have a dog, to have your dog sit, to have your dog lay down, to walk the room with your dog, to be able to demonstrate that they are behaved on a leash. The second half of the evaluation we call the aptitude portion, and this is where the evaluator will introduce to you and your pet kind of scenarios or situations you are likely to encounter in a therapy animal visit. So somebody will approach your pet while using a piece of medical equipment. Somebody will approach your pet using a very loud, almost yelling voice. There will be distracting noises happening. All of these things can happen on a therapy animal visit, right? It's very common for our therapy animals to interact with people who use mobility devices. If you volunteer in a school, you're going to hear loud ringing bells from time to time, yelling children. So these are all things that allow us to see how you and your pet navigate situations you're likely to see when volunteering. Really important to point out, and this goes back to the human end of the leash, your score for the evaluation is half your pet and half you. So every single exercise, both you and your pet are scored, but you're scored separately. So your pet could do everything right, but if you as a handler aren't advocating for your pet, if you aren't supporting your pet, if you're not directing the evaluator or telling the evaluator about your pet, he really likes to be scratched behind the ears, or could we take turns petting the animal when you're put into some of these situations where multiple people are touching your pet. Those are things the evaluator wants to see. So if you don't perform those exercises, but your pet does well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you pass. And that's because we see every handler with their animal as a team, and the evaluation is a team evaluation. So that's all I'll say about the evaluation. People usually have questions about that, which I'm happy to answer. It does take, I should mention, it takes about 30 to 40 minutes to move through the evaluation. So it is less than an hour. Let's go to the next slide. So up on your screen are some benefits of registering with Pet Partners. The one that I do want to point out is that we provide liability insurance to all of our teams. So when you are going to a facility, say the local school, and they would like you to visit with your pet, usually they're going to ask for your insurance information, and Pet Partners does provide general liability insurance to our volunteers. So that is the benefit that I do really like to point out, just so that you're aware that is part of volunteering and something facilities are definitely going to want to verify. I think that's my last slide, but let's see what comes up next. It is. Great. So I have my email address up there. I'm happy to answer any individual questions by email, but I also would absolutely be happy to hang out here for a few more minutes. If anybody has questions, I'd love to hear where you are in the process. Maybe some of you have already taken the handlers course. Maybe some of you are ready to evaluate. Maybe there's others who are, you got a brand new pet and you're just feeling like this is going to be a good fit and you're early on in the process. I'd love to stay and answer any questions live that I can. I'm just scrolling up here to see if any have come in. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any come in, so we'll leave my slide up there with my email address for just a few more moments for anybody who does want to ask individual questions. Other than that, I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, go to our website, start a volunteer center account. There's no obligation. You don't have to volunteer just because you create an account. What that does do is it allows you to click through our registration process, some of those steps that I showed on screen, so you can get a sense of what's involved. It'll also allow you to search our resource library for all sorts of different information. So absolutely avail yourself of a free volunteer center account. Dana, I see your question. Will there be an evaluator in BC? I assume you mean British Columbia. I would have to look that up. I don't know that we for sure do have one in British Columbia. We do have them in Canada, but more on the east. We do have evaluators in Bellingham, though. So I know that there have been times where people have traveled if they are close to the border. But that would be a question I'm happy to answer for you individually once I know exactly where you are in BC and I can see how close the closest evaluator is. But to everybody else, again, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.